It started with a letter, not a welcome note, not a knock on the door from a friendly neighbor. A letter, hand-delivered, sealed with the official gold-stamped emblem of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Now, here's the kicker. I don't live in Maple Ridge. My house sits on the other side of the cul-de-sac, a half-acre lot with tall oaks, a gravel driveway, and a 2-story farmhouse I restore with my own hands. It's outside the HOA's official jurisdiction by a solid 50 feet. I double-checked the zoning maps myself before I bought it. But that didn't stop Karen. Her real name is Lynette Carlson, but let's not pretend anyone calls her that. Around here, she's just Karen, the clipboard crusader of Maple Ridge, president of the HOA for the past 6 years running, self-appointed enforcer of lawn aesthetics, mailbox alignment, and suburban conformity. She's the kind of woman who walks her dog 3 times a day just to take mental notes on whose porch light stayed on too long the night before. You could say she takes her volunteer role a bit too seriously. You could also say she weaponized it. The letter was 3 pages long, typed, with multiple citations to Maple Ridge HOA bylaws, none of which applied to me. According to the letter, I had intentionally adopted the visual style, landscaping layout, and exterior color palette of the Maple Ridge community, which, in her words, constituted misleading representation of residency. In simpler terms, she was accusing me of looking like I lived in her neighborhood. That's right. She was offended that my property, which wasn't under her control, looked too good. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so serious. The letter ended with a warning. Failure to amend your property's external presentation may result in formal legal action. I read it twice, then a third time, then laughed out loud. But I should have known better. Maple Ridge had a reputation. I'd heard whispers from neighbors, stories about paint colors that mysteriously got flagged as non-compliant, even though they'd been approved, about fines for Christmas lights that were left up past January 5th, about elderly residents pushed out because they couldn't afford landscaping upgrades every season. The idea was always the same: uniformity. Karen-style uniformity. Still, I thought I was safe. I picked this house specifically because it wasn't governed by an HOA. I loved the freedom. I built my own garden beds. I painted my porch slate gray. I installed solar-powered lights along the driveway. I even put in a reclaimed wood mailbox I made from my grandfather's old fence planks, a tribute to him and a pretty unique design, if I say so myself. Turns out that mailbox is what triggered her. One morning, I was out front planting lavender along the walkway when I heard her voice, sharp, nasal, and full of judgment. You know, that mailbox is technically in violation. I looked up. Karen was standing on the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, a smug look on her face, and Muffin, her tiny white designer dog, yapping at my boots like I'd stepped on sacred ground. I brushed the dirt off my hands. Excuse me, the height. It's not within Maple Ridge postal compliance guidelines. I stared at her. Well, good news. This isn't Maple Ridge. She sniffed. Yes, but you're directly adjacent, which means your property reflects on the entire community. I'm not part of your community. She ignored me. We've already had 2 residents ask if you're part of the HOA. That's misleading. You're making it look like your home is one of ours. I laughed. So now it's a crime to have a nice lawn? She didn't even blink. I've issued a formal warning. You'll find the letter on your porch. She turned on her heel and walked away like she just dropped the mic. And she had, at least in her mind, that was the start of a campaign. Over the next week, I found 2 more letters taped to my door. One criticizing my choice of fence paint. Another warning me that my porch lights were aesthetic violations by association. I wasn't inside her boundary lines, but she was trying to redraw them. A neighbor across the street, Henry, who was part of the HOA, gave me the lowdown over a coffee one morning. Look, he said, Karen's a nutcase. She acts like she owns a zip code. Technically, she's only got power over the 38 homes in Maple Ridge, but she's tried to unofficially enforce a buffer zone. A buffer zone? Yeah, if your house butts up against hers, she thinks she can pressure you into compliance. Had a guy down the road who had to fight her for 6 months just to keep his wind chimes. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty harassment. It was about control. And it got worse. The next week, I came home from a work trip to find a large wooden sign staked at the edge of her neighborhood. Private HOA community. Violations will be reported. It was pointed directly at my house. A few days later, someone from the city showed up. A zoning inspector. "We got a complaint that your fence might exceed code height," he said. It didn't. I showed him the permits. He left shaking his head. This is the third bogus call we gotten from that HOA in 2 months. But the most insane moment came when Karen herself returned, this time with 2 other board members in tow. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was trimming my hedges. I saw them marching up my driveway like a homeowner patrol squad. "We're serving notice," Karen said, handing me a manila folder. Inside was a civil lawsuit. The title read, Maple Ridge HOA versus Stephen Beckett. Allegations: visual misrepresentation of community affiliation, non-approved aesthetic mimicry, and willful disregard for community zoning harmony. I looked at them, stunned. "You're suing me?" Karen's smile was icy. "The board has voted unanimously. I don't live in your HOA. We're arguing impact. Your proximity means you fall within the sphere of community influence. The court will understand." I stared at her. For the first time, I felt something shift, something deeper than frustration. It was a feeling of being challenged in a way I hadn't felt in years. She thought I'd back down. She thought a lawsuit would scare me. She didn't know who I was, or what I had spent my career doing. What she really didn't know is that I've been quietly documenting every step she took, every letter, every word, every violation of civil boundaries, every abuse of power. And more than that, she didn't know what I had ready in my back pocket. I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I knew what was coming. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle her HOA kingdom, brick by clipboard-carrying brick. Karen may have thought filing a lawsuit was a final move, the proverbial slam dunk in her power play, but she just initiated the middle act of a much longer game. And this time, she wasn't the only one watching. The day after I received the HOA's ridiculous complaint, I did what anyone with legal sense and a vendetta brewing would do. I lawyered up. Fortunately, I had an ace in my corner. My cousin Marissa is a civil litigation attorney with a specialty in municipal overreach. The moment she read the lawsuit, she chuckled and said, "This might be the most desperate HOA stunt I've seen all year, and I handle 3 of these a month." We filed a motion to dismiss. But while the legal wheels turned slowly, Karen moved fast and louder. The lawsuit gave her cover. She began acting like she already had jurisdiction over my property. HOA board meeting agendas started mentioning border compliance and extended community harmony initiatives. I received an anonymous letter, though we both know who wrote it, suggesting that I was sowing confusion among young families by refusing to place a Maple Ridge placard near my mailbox. It wasn't just paper harassment anymore. It was public spectacle. A few of her board members, Mr. Dobbs, the grumpy ex-Air Force guy with an obsession for lawn edging, and Janet Pierce, the self-proclaimed community traditions coordinator, started lurking near my property line more frequently. If I was on a ladder, trimming hedges, one of them would appear nearby with a phone out, pretend to take a walk, but clearly recording. They were trying to provoke me into snapping, into saying something they could weaponize. So I didn't snap. I filmed everything back. By midweek, I installed 3 cameras, one above my garage, one aimed at the mailbox, and one in the oak tree overlooking the driveway. Every visitor, every clipboard carrier, every dog walker pretending to pass by, I caught them all. And when Karen decided to up the pressure again, I caught that too. It was a Friday morning when I walked out to get my mail and noticed a big neon orange sticker slapped to the side of my truck. Community vehicle warning. Unauthorized overnight parking. I stood in disbelief. My truck was in my driveway, on my land. The sticker was thick and gummy, the kind meant to leave residue. There was a folded paper stuffed into the driver's side mirror. Another notice, complete with the Maple Ridge HOA logo and some made-up ordinance about garage enclosure preference. Karen had crossed the line. That evening, I printed out blown-up copies of my zoning map, property deed, and a screenshot from the city's GIS system showing the HOA boundary lines. I mailed a copy to Karen, to the HOA office, and more importantly, to every board member. Then I did one more thing. I created a website, www.mapleridgemyths.com. It was simple, just a homepage featuring a timeline of interactions, the lawsuit, my legal filings, and copies of every letter and warning I'd received. I made sure it was indexed properly for search. Within a few days, it started showing up when people Googled Maple Ridge HOA. Karen did not take that well. The next HOA meeting was packed. Standing room only. I attended, of course. I wasn't technically a member, but since I was named in their lawsuit, I had every right to listen. I wore a clean button-down, brought my laptop, and sat in the back row. Calm, quiet, observing. Karen stood at the front of the room in a salmon-pink blouse, trying to command the room with her usual blend of condescension and fake smiles. As many of you know, our HOA has been unfairly targeted by misleading online attacks, she began. One guy in the second row raised his hand. Are you talking about that website? I read it. Everything on there is documented. Why are we suing someone who doesn't live here? Karen's smile twitched. He's deliberately mimicking our design code. That's not a crime, another neighbor said. He's not even inside the HOA. Why are our dues being used to fund a lawsuit against someone outside our community? Boom. It rippled like a spark in dry grass. Voices murmured. People whispered. The board members looked uneasy. Karen tried to regain control. It's about preserving the integrity of our... I don't want my fees paying for the circus. A third voice cut in. I just sat there, watching her crumble one resident at a time. She hadn't expected this. She thought the lawsuit would scare me into submission, not turn her own neighbors against her. But I wasn't done yet. Later that week, I filed a counterclaim, not just for harassment, but for attempted encroachment and public defamation. Marissa helped me structure a claim with care, citing a Virginia statute regarding repeated misuse of legal threats by homeowners associations. We included screenshots, sworn statements from 2 other neighbors who'd also been targeted by Karen, and video evidence showing her tampering with my mailbox flag. Karen now found herself named in a personal civil suit, not just acting through the HOA. Her power was slipping, and she knew it. I could tell because she stopped being bold. No more surprise letters. No more drive-bys with Muffin. For 3 days it was quiet. Too quiet. Then came the petition. Karen went door to door in Maple Ridge. Yes, physically, trying to get signatures for a proposed bylaw change that would extend the HOA's aesthetic jurisdiction to adjacent properties. She wanted to rewrite the rules retroactively so she could claim power over homes that bordered the community. It was desperation, at its most theatrical. The move backfired. Hard. More neighbors visited my site. Some even reached out directly. One retired teacher emailed me to say she'd had similar run-ins with Karen over her non-standard porch wind chimes. Another woman said Karen once demanded she remove her front yard scarecrow because it was seasonally insensitive in late November. They were tired of her. And for the first time in 6 years, people started whispering about a vote, an emergency board vote, a recall. The silence before a storm is always the loudest. Karen had gone quiet, almost too quiet. No letters, no violations, not even a judgmental glare from her front window. But in that sudden stillness, I could feel something shifting. She wasn't surrendering. She was scheming, and I was preparing my move. By now, my countersuit had gained traction. Marissa, my cousin and civil attorney, was building a thick case file. The judge had already ruled that the HOA's lawsuit was questionably motivated, and our counterclaim had been granted a preliminary hearing. Karen was sweating, but I didn't just want to win in court. I wanted to win everywhere, legally, publicly, and permanently, because this wasn't just about me anymore. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Turns out, Karen's reign of HOA terror had been going on for years. I started interviewing neighbors. Dozens had stories. One family was fined $500 because their backyard trampoline was too colorful. A Vietnam vet had his flagpole forcibly removed by order of the HOA, citing height restrictions. Another woman broke down crying as she described how Karen made her repaint her door 3 times in 1 month. And the worst part? Many of them never fought back. They were elderly, or busy parents, or didn't know they could resist. That's when I decided this wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about ending the reign of HOA Karen, once and for all. I started gathering everything. First, I built a full digital archive of Karen's behavior, not just toward me, but toward everyone who had come forward. I included emails, security footage, voice recordings, several neighbors had saved voicemails, and signed written statements. I even hired a local graphic designer to help me build a timeline of Karen's abuse, a visual chart with dates, faces, fines, and quotes. It looked like the wall of a true crime documentary. Second, I filed a FOIA request with the city. I wanted everything Maple Ridge HOA had submitted in public filings over the past 5 years. Meeting minutes, bylaw updates, fines issued, permit complaints. I spent 2 late nights sifting through PDFs until my eyes blurred, but it was worth it, because that's when I struck gold. A pattern emerged. Karen had not only harassed homeowners, she had personally profited from at least 2 landscaping violations by directing contractors she had personal ties to. In both cases, homeowners were told to hire specific companies to comply, and those companies just so happened to list Karen's niece as an office manager. I forwarded that to Marissa. Her response? This just went from HOA nonsense to potential fraud. Now came Phase 3, bringing the neighborhood into it. I printed 50 copies of a single-sheet summary. One side featured the timeline of Karen's abuses. The other side showed a clean, simple flowchart of her lawsuit against me, my countersuit, and how their dues were funding this personal war. At the bottom, in bold, enough is enough. Special meeting this Saturday. HOA recall vote, let your voice be heard. I didn't put my name on it. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had already started connecting the dots. By Saturday morning, the Maple Ridge Community Hall was packed. Not just HOA members, curious onlookers too. Even the local reporter from the suburban weekly paper showed up, smartphone in hand. Karen sat at the front of the room, flanked by 2 board members. Her eyes scanned the crowd nervously. This wasn't her usual echo chamber anymore. The room felt different. No muffins, no fake smiles, no one nodding automatically at her every word. It was quiet until I stood up. I'd like to address the room, I said. Karen began to protest, but the vice president waved her down. He's allowed to speak, he said. He's a named party in the lawsuit. Let's hear him out. So I walked to the front of the room, plugged in my laptop, and hit play. The projector flickered to life. Slide 1. The front of my house, with the HOA zone map clearly showing that I lived outside the boundary. Slide 2. A zoomed-in image of Karen's letterhead and the fabricated violations. Slide 3. The timeline of neighbor complaints, with faces blurred for privacy and bullet point summaries. Slide 4. A list of questionable vendor referrals, complete with tax records showing the financial connections. Then, I played one of the voicemail recordings. Hi, this is Karen from the HOA. We've noticed your garage door is still painted that non-regulation cream tone. Please fix it by Friday or expect a notice. The voice echoed through the hall. No one spoke. Then I brought up the final slide. This isn't community leadership. This is control. And it's time we take it back. A man in the 3rd row stood and clapped. Then another. Then half the room. Karen sat frozen, her face pale. Her hands clenched the sides of the table, like she was trying to stay grounded. But it was too late. The vote happened. It was fast, brutal, unanimous. Karen was recalled as HOA president, effective immediately. But I wasn't done. The next day, with Karen officially removed, Marissa and I filed a formal motion to drop the original lawsuit and simultaneously move forward with our harassment countersuit against Karen personally. Without the HOA to shield her, she was now exposed. And with the help of neighbors who were finally free to speak up, we had more than enough material to proceed. That's when Karen really cracked. She called Marissa's office and begged to settle. But I had one final move left, something symbolic. A week later, I placed a brand new sign near the edge of my property, right where Karen's infamous private HOA. Violations will be reported. Sign once stood. Mine read, "You are now leaving Karen's jurisdiction." It went viral on Nextdoor and read it within days. It was funny how the woman who tried to control an entire neighborhood through rule books and fear suddenly became very quiet when the spotlight turned on her, after Karen was officially recalled by the HOA board in front of a packed community room. She didn't show her face for days. Not during her usual morning dog walk. Not at the mailbox. Not even in her garden, where she used to hover like a gargoyle watching for infractions. But we weren't finished. Not yet. Marissa and I had kept one move in reserve. Something we prepared from the very beginning of the countersuit. Something Karen didn't know about. Because while she was busy trying to sue me for existing, we were quietly preparing to strike the one place she couldn't ignore. Her wallet. With the HOA lawsuit dropped and the countersuit proceeding independently, we filed for discovery, a legal phase where both sides must exchange evidence. Karen thought we'd just send over the usual documents. But when her new lawyer opened our package, what he found was 87 pages of documented evidence, signed statements from over 14 residents, and an itemized list of how her fabricated fines had cost individual homeowners thousands in illegal citations. We weren't just suing for harassment anymore. We were suing for damages, misconduct, and misrepresentation. Karen's attorney immediately tried to negotiate a private settlement, but we refused. This was never about money. It was about the record. So we pushed it to court. The day of the hearing arrived like a storm. I showed up in a dark navy blazer, clean jeans, and the same boots Karen once tried to get me fined over for yard work attire. Marissa stood beside me, crisp and composed. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but packed. Word had gotten around. A few neighbors even took time off work to sit in the back pews. One brought popcorn. No joke. Karen sat at the defendant's table wearing the stiffest blazer I'd ever seen and a face like she'd chewed a lemon. The judge was a no-nonsense woman with decades on the bench. She flipped through our file for nearly a minute before speaking. "You're telling me this entire dispute originated because the defendant believed she had authority over someone who doesn't live in her HOA?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marissa said smoothly. Despite zoning maps, city boundary documents, and tax records proving otherwise, Ms. Karen and the Maple Ridge Board filed a baseless lawsuit, harassed Mr. Walker, and targeted him with fabricated violations. Karen's lawyer tried to object. "There is some ambiguity." "There is no ambiguity." The judge cut in. "Not when the zoning map is this clear." Then came the videos. We played security footage of Karen trespassing onto my property, placing fake violation notes on my truck, adjusting my mailbox, and filming my lawn while muttering to herself. We showed the screenshot of text messages between her and another board member saying, "If we can get him fine enough, maybe he'll sell." We showed the voicemail where she instructed a resident to use her niece's landscaping company, or risk being reported for yard symmetry violations. The courtroom was dead silent. The judge looked up slowly and said, "Miss Karen, would you like to explain why you acted with such authority over property outside your jurisdiction?" Karen tried. "Oh," she tried. I believed he was part of the extended HOA border. The records were unclear and..." "They're not," the judge snapped. "They're not unclear. And ignorance is not a defense, especially not when paired with a pattern of behavior like this." That's when we played the final video. It was from the recall vote. The room packed with angry neighbors. Karen's face as she was ousted. The community applauding. The judge leaned back. "I think I've seen enough." Ruling in our favor. Karen was ordered to pay damages. Not just to me, but restitution to 3 other neighbors named in our class action countersuit. Combined total, over $42,000. But that wasn't the real revenge. The real revenge came 2 weeks later. I hosted a barbecue. A big one. We opened the back gate, fired up the smoker, invited every single resident who ever got a violation from Karen. People showed up with homemade pies, folding chairs, even fireworks. We hung a big white banner across the yard fence. No HOA zone, neighbors only. Laughter rang out. Kids played. Music blasted. And right as the sun dipped low, someone asked if we could replay the footage. The footage. So I brought a projector, hung a white sheet between two trees, and played the courtroom video on loop. We watched Karen squirm in legal discomfort again and again. And somewhere behind her shuttered windows, we knew she could hear the celebration. It was the sweetest sound. But wait, it gets better. You remember the zoning maps I used to prove Karen had no jurisdiction over my land? Well, the week after the ruling, I got a visit from a city planning officer. Turns out, a large parcel of land directly behind Maple Ridge was being opened up for development, just outside the HOA's reach. A few neighbors asked me if I consider applying to be part of the planning committee, since I'd proven myself such a capable, let's say, organizer. I smiled. Let's just say, the next development over from Maple Ridge, it won't be HOA controlled. We're calling it Free Ridge. And the slogan? No fines, just friends. You'd think after the court ruling, the payout, and the neighborhood revolt that Karen would vanish quietly into suburban obscurity, that she'd retreat to her garden or go visit family out of state, like she used to say when someone challenged her at an HOA meeting. But no, Karen tried one last act of defiance. 3 days after the ruling, she taped up a handwritten sign in her front yard, unfairly targeted. This is still my community. It was written in red marker, crooked letters on foam board. The woman who once printed violation notices on legal-sized paper using official HOA letterhead was now scrawling desperation onto discount craft supplies. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But this time, no one came to defend her. No one nodded from a distance. Her former inner circle had either resigned or jumped ship the moment her authority collapsed. Without her HOA crown, Karen was just another neighbor, with a lot of enemies and no power. Meanwhile, the community was transforming. I walked the block and saw things I hadn't seen in years. American flags on poles that had been unauthorized. Children's chalk drawings all over sidewalks that used to get washed off under threat of fines. Lawn chairs left out overnight. Solar lights along driveways. People smiling, not nervously, but freely. The fear was gone. Karen, meanwhile, was trying to claw it back. She submitted a letter to the local paper claiming she had been defamed, that she was the victim of a social smear campaign designed to destabilize proper community order. The editor didn't publish it. Someone leaked it to me instead. I framed it, added a sticky note that said, Karen's final violation, and hung it in my garage. Then came the kicker. Remember the city planner who stopped by my house a few weeks prior? Well, he wasn't just asking about the Free Ridge development. Turns out, after reviewing everything I submitted in my zoning research and the public attention the case had drawn, the city council decided to formally review Maple Ridge HOA's charter. And what they found was stunning. Apparently, the original HOA charter had expired its legal renewal in 2007. No one, not even Karen, had filed to require extensions with the State Housing Board. That meant Maple Ridge HOA was technically operating under a lapsed charter. In other words, every single enforcement action since 2007 was invalid. Fines, threats, restrictions, all of it void. Karen hadn't just abused power. She'd enforced fake power for over a decade. When that ruling came down, the shock was instant. People who had paid thousands in cumulative fines over the years were now demanding refunds. A class action discussion began in the Maple Ridge Facebook group. Some neighbors wanted to sue. Others just wanted closure. I stayed out of it. My mission was complete. But the fallout for Karen? Colossal. Her retirement savings? Tied up in restitution. Her home? Listed for sale within 2 months. The listing had one interesting note at the bottom. Buyer advised property previously owned by HOA board member. Community governance currently under review. Translation: buy at your own risk. It's haunted by Karen's ghost. On the day the moving truck pulled into her driveway, I stood by my fence. She didn't look up as the workers hauled out her artificial topiary trees and giant binders of HOA bylaws. She kept her head low, lips tight, but just before the last box went in, she turned. Our eyes met, And I nodded, not smugly, just once. Calm, controlled. She held my gaze for half a second, then looked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. 3 weeks later, Free Ridge officially broke ground. I walked the perimeter with the development team. No fences, no security cameras, just open land and honest conversation. I pitched them a plan. Shared green space, optional community events, no required dues, and a homeowner charter that emphasized freedom and mutual respect, not fines and fear. They liked it. And wouldn't you know it, several Maple Ridge families were the first to sign interest forms. The same people Karen used to rule over with citations and condescension were ready to start fresh, somewhere where community meant connection, not control. And as for me, I installed a new welcome mat on my porch, one Karen would have fined me for. It reads, "Live, laugh, leave me alone." I kept the old mailbox she once said didn't meet visual compliance standards. I even left up the "Now leaving Karen's jurisdiction" sign. People drive by to take selfies with it now. It's become a kind of local landmark. My cousin Marissa, she got 3 new clients for my case and is now known as the HOA Slayer around the county. And I got my piece. And the one thing Karen could never deliver to this neighborhood: freedom.